Hi everyone, welcome to 2026. It's an absolute pleasure, as always, to not only welcome you back to our new school year. If you're in Australia, you're probably gearing up for term one, and maybe you're already back at work. Maybe your students are due back in the next week or two. Depends how quickly I can get this podcast out for all of you. I'm hoping that the school break has left you rested, rejuvenated, and ready for a new year. Of course, if you're one of our listeners from overseas, many of you might have had a break over the Christmas, New Year break. Wherever you might be, I'm hoping this message finds you well. I had every intention when I went into our school summer break here in Australia, the beautiful, best intention to rest and recharge and rejuvenate. And just prior to Christmas, actually my little family was plagued with viruses over the last 4.5 weeks. Everything from gastro right through to the flu. And as you might hear in my voice, I'm only now recovering from it. So it's been a fun, adventurous and physically exhausting 4 weeks, but I'm still coming back in the midst of the chaos that is illness within a family. I still managed to find to carve out pockets of time to reflect on 2025 and to frame up how I want 2026 to look like. And so I'm coming back into this year with some mental clarity and some quiet optimism. And I think while I might feel physically exhausted, I'm actually coming back mentally recharged to some degree. And it's a nice space to be. And so this episode really is about welcoming you back to 2026. I want to take you through a few things in this episode. One is I want to share with you my process of reflection. How did I go about that during December and January? What am I seeing as my ongoing process of reflection during 2026? I want to revisit, so if you're familiar, I've mentioned it multiple times now, the one-word strategy, how I use it, how it applies to me personally and professionally. And then I also want to talk to you about what's coming up in the podcast, so what you can expect from this amazing little podcast for 2026. So let's kick off my process of reflection. So there's many ways you can reflect on the year, but it's very important to take the time, I think, to reflect. It doesn't have to be at the end of the year. Actually, the most powerful reflections are happening regularly. But I always find the end of the year is just that sort of prominent moment in time that invites reflection. And so it just seems opportune to navigate that, to take advantage of that. And the way that I have found myself reflecting over a number of years now is, here's my process. So I opened up a Word document on my laptop. I created a table, very simple table, 3 columns. The first column, I list down different categories that are prominent categories of components of my life. And you can list whatever categories you want, but just as some examples of these categories, if you follow Robin Sharma's work, so Robin Sharma is a leadership coach out of Canada. If you've read his book, The Wealth Money Can't Buy, but he has these 8 forms of wealth. And he's been teaching this for multiple years now. And if you Google 8 forms of wealth, you'll get an image of the 8 forms of wealth that he advocates for. Now, I'm just going to read them out for you so you can get a sense for the different categories that, if you followed Robin's model, you could list these there. So the first one is growth, wellness. So that's the second one, sorry. So third one's family. Fourth one's craft. Fifth is money. Sixth is community. Seventh is adventure. And the 8th is service. And so in essence, you could list each of these categories on the left-hand side in that column 1 of your table. Here's another example, and I'm probably going to butcher this. And Laura Leconf. I've totally butchered. I feel like it's a French name and I'm butchering it. Anyhow, she's the author of Tiny Experiments, and I follow her on Instagram, and she posted towards the end of last year kind of her 9 categories. 9 felt a little bit extensive to me, but I thought I would share with you those 9 so you can get a sense, just as another example, of how you might list those categories or conceptualize those categories. So here are the categories: health and fitness, work and business, friends and community, personal life and family, learning and knowledge, travel and culture, hobbies and creativity, emotions and spirituality, and money and finances. And so there's 9 categories, and on top of that, she has kind of 2 words in each of the categories. I find it a little bit too much. So, you can choose which categories resonate with you and kind of piece that together. So I've my collection of categories are a combination of these two spaces and then have been reworked and adapted over years with my own terms. And so on the left-hand side, I just list the category. So this is me in December, laptop, Word document, 3-column table. First column, I list down these categories. Second column, very, very simple. I just spent a little bit of time going through each category and asking myself 3 very simple questions. What worked well? What didn't work so well? And how do I want this category to look like in 2026? Okay, so we're engaging in a level of metacognitive evaluation, which is edging into the planning forethought phase of self-regulated learning, right? Because as we start to ask ourselves, what could this look like for 2026? What's my goals here? How do I want this to play out? We're entering into a space of forethought. And so as you reflect, this is column 2, we're just reflecting on what worked well, what didn't work so well, and how do I want this to look in 2026? I was just literally typing. It was just sentence after sentence, just reflections, very kind of consciousness just being dripped onto the page there. There's no hard and fast rules here. You can do dot points, you can do anything you like, but the aim here is to invest time to think about each of these categories, whatever categories you've chosen to list down. What I found as I was reflecting was that through that process, the goals that I wanted for 2026 and the actions that I was going to take to fulfill those goals slowly became clearer. And so I documented them in the 3rd column just to separate them out from my reflections and say, right, this is the core goal that I have for this category for 2026. And these are some of the dot point actions that I want to take in 2026. And so suddenly, as I engaged in that process, not only was I reflecting, which was really nice to just kind of process last year, I was gaining clarity around what I wanted the goals to look like for this year. I found myself enjoying the process so much that I wanted to spend a little bit of time each morning over the break, just revisiting and reconnecting and just thinking about what this actually meant for me. And originally I thought, right, yeah, this is a great process. I'm going to do this at the end of every year. But then I thought, well, actually, no, at the end of every year just seems like such a big gap. And this is what typically happens with people who set goals. It's the same for our students, that we don't revisit the goals regularly enough for them to actually have meaning. And so I thought I've got to bring the moments of revisiting down. Like it has to be more regular. And so originally I thought, right, I'll do it every quarter. And then I thought, no, actually, maybe it should be every month. And then I thought, no, well, hold on. What if I could make it every day? Now that might seem a little bit ridiculous to you. Sometimes I worry that I alienate myself by taking these strategies to the level that I like to take them. I have a morning routine, and what I've done over the last couple of weeks is spend a portion of my morning routine just opening up the laptop, revisiting these categories, just really briefly. And what I've found over the last few weeks is that it slowly transformed the process from a reflection, broad goal setting to how did I go with this category in the last 24 hours? And how do I want the next 24 hours to play out in relation to each of these categories? So really consciously, intentionally trying to shape every day to essentially build out my 2026. 2025 for me was quite a reactive year. I didn't expect my work to grow at the pace in which it did. And I found myself very reactive to a number of things. I don't want that to be my 2026. I want 2026 to revert back to my very intentional state and very proactive state. And so what I'm trying to do through this process is make sure that every day has that level of intention. I'm optimistic that I can do this every day, even in the smallest capacity, but I'm going to try and really build it in, because if there's a number of quotes that kind of resonate in my mind, but your days, I think this is a Robin Sharma quote actually, your days are your life in miniature. This sort of idea of, I don't want to get to the end of 2026 and look back and go, oh, it could have been a better year. I actually want every day to be the best day that it could be, so that actually 2026 ends up being a stellar year for me. So let's see how I go. That's the plan. Now, the other element of my usual annual reflections is to think of a word, one word. So if you're not familiar with one word, very, very simple concept that you choose one word as a goal. It doesn't have to be for the year. It could be for a day. It could be for a lesson. It could be for how you want to show up as a learner in a learning experience. So it can be related to anything, but the notion is one word. And this is a shout out to Dr. Jason Fox, who introduced me to this concept many moons ago. And, it's been talked about in different forms. I personally have played with this strategy multiple times over multiple years, and I find it really useful, particularly at this time of the year. So I typically choose one word to frame up the year. And so last year my word was service, and it was all about how can I be of service to the community? How can I best be of service to my family, and so on and so forth. It's a very honourable word, I think, and for me it was where I was at the time, but there's an inherent risk with an outward facing goal like service, or one word like service, because when a lot of my work became focused on serving others, and this is ironic given I advocate for self-regulation, I inherently forgot about sustaining myself through that process. And so I want to turn the lens further in again, because I think it's a bit like that oxygen mask metaphor. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the notion that we have to put our oxygen masks on first before we can help others put theirs on. I realized that in order to serve others, I have to actually make sure that I'm sustaining myself in that process as well. And so I'm thinking very carefully about my 2026 word right now. I've got a few floating around. I'm thinking very carefully about what my 2026 word is going to be. I've got a few words that are resonating. I haven't quite landed on that one word just yet, but I thought I might give you some examples of words that I've had in the past that if you choose to engage in this process, you might like to use it, and it might help you. So as I mentioned last year, my word was service. While I love that and that's part of my value system, I wouldn't advocate for that to be necessarily your word. I think words that are a bit more balanced between the individual and others, I think, is important. I've had the word, so my first word actually when I set out in this process was the word raw, R-A-W. I know that might sound funny to some. That was what resonated with me in that first year that I did this. This was about 7 years ago. For me, it was about being more open, honest, authentic, transparent in who I was in the world and in the work that I was doing. And so you could use a word like authentic if you prefer, but raw for me resonated on multiple levels, not just in the way that I was showing up as an individual, but also in I was really into sort of paleo diets at the time. And so I like this idea of eating your sort of raw nutrition to some degree. So it kind of resonated with me in multiple levels. I think the next word that I had was minimalist, I think, from memory, which kind of evolved into essential. If you've read the book by Greg McKeown, Essentialism, I'm a big fan of that book and that philosophy. And so this idea about what is essential, and so taking an essentialist mindset for a year. I probably adopted that for a number of years, and it was a very powerful word at that time for me. I played, 1 year I had the word slow, so it was all about slowing down because life and family work was all getting pretty busy. I had a range of other words. So I think one year I might have tried the word declutter. It didn't work. I played with the word boundaries, creative kind of words. Anyhow, there's so many different words you could choose. And right now I've got like 3 or 4 that I'm bouncing around for this year. But I think that process of thinking about how words resonate with you, how you want your year to frame out, I think that's an exciting process. I think it's a useful process. And I think once you get down to it, like I hold all my thinking, all my goals lightly. And so nothing here is static, because even when I chose a word like service last year, the whole time that I was reflecting, I could have changed it at any point, but I liked the word so much that I stood with it. And I've learned a lot from that process. Even if the word doesn't work out for you perfectly, I think there's still a lot of learning that you can do with the word. So that's what I'm going to suggest. If you choose to, I'm going to invite you to think about what one word might you choose to frame up your 2026, because sometimes clarity begins with just one word, right? Like it's one word. And so hopefully that's going to benefit you. As I mentioned, what I've found over the series of years that I've done this is that the words now, they're not standalone one words. Actually, I've got them written on a post-it note that sits, here it is. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. That'll give you an example of the words that I've had. And like I said, there's 1, 2, 3, there's 7, I think 6 or 7 words on that post-it note. It sits on my monitor screen as a bit of a collection of values. So as every year when I set a word, I realized that it connects with a deeper value of mine. And so I've got this kind of value system that has been slowly been taking shape. And now it's sitting on that post note as a reminder of me, of the journey, but also of my current sort of value system. So it may well end up being something similar for you if you do something like that. Now, we've got a few minutes left. I just want to run you through what's coming up in the podcast this year. So I want to take it to another level. I'm not quite sure how to do that, but I have some grand aspirations, which I mentioned at the end of last year. I think there's a lot of value in getting some academic voices into the podcast outside of my own. And I think there's value in interviewing some of the leading researchers in the field of self-regulated learning from around the world on this podcast and helping translate some of that research into pragmatic, practical solutions for you as educators. And so that's my aim for this year, to leverage my network and I'm connected with quite a number of academics around the world that specialize in the field of self-regulated learning just because of our shared interest. Very recently have been co-authoring a book that is an academic book that is all about self-regulated learning. A number of key academics from around the world are contributing book chapters to that book. And so there's these list of names that I can already think of that I go, it would be amazing to interview this person about this part of self-regulated learning. And so I want to bring that to you. I want to leverage that, see if it works, see if they're willing to share with us some of their thinking and try and break that down for us as educators, because it's, for sake of a better word, to bridge that gap between theory and practice. So that's my intention, to bring some of those longer form episodes, maybe around 45 minutes, these interview style formats with these leading academics and researchers in the field of self-regulated learning, so that you can get the cutting edge, the contemporary knowledge around self-regulated learning. So we'll see, that's the aim. Of course, we want to continue the regular sort of formats, the teacher examples, the classroom examples, bring in the sort of discussions with teachers around research papers and so on and so forth, as Rory and I used to have, and now Nadine and I have had recently as well. And so I'm going to play with that, the solo episodes. I'm trying to do a few more of those as well. But the primary aim for the podcast, if I had to strip it down to what my core goal is for the podcast this year, is to bring some of that deep academic thinking to the mix of practice, and so that we can dissect it and make it meaningful. That if I could get that done, if we could get 10 episodes in the bank this year that were of that nature, I think I could walk away from this year knowing that the podcast had been successful, at least from my lens. But if you have any ideas or further thoughts about that, please let me know, reach out to me. My email is consulting@shinebar.com.au. Don't hesitate to get in touch. I'd love to hear your thoughts and any feedback you have for me about the podcast. I'm all ears. Okay, so on that note, I just want to wish you all the best for 2026. I hope, if you're here in Australia, you kick off 2026 on the best foot. And for those of you around the world, looking forward to staying connected and hopefully, co-constructing this knowledge that is so important for us and our learners in the space of self-regulated learning. Talk soon.